place of Al Dutcher's normal weekly forecast, we instead sat down with Al recently to look at current and future weather conditions due to El Nino. To start, we asked Al to first explain what El Nino means.
Well, in the simplest of terms, El Nino is just a modification of the atmospheric pressure patterns in the equatorial Pacific. So when we look at the relaxation or weakening of those pressure patterns, we typically see a loss of cloud cover in the equatorial Pacific. That's usually an area converging winds. So we see the weakening there, and we get more solar radiation at the surface of the ocean. It tends to warm it up, and the relaxation of the pressure gradient slows the movement of winds from the eastern Pacific to the western Pacific, and that allows water to build up. Conversely, when we go talk about La Nina, it really is just an over-strengthening of the normal pressure patterns, and the reflection of that is that we see colder than normal sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, and that's because we see increased cloud cover and also increased precipitation. So it's just a way to describe a naturally occurring mechanism, and we're looking at the extremes of that mechanism when we talk about El Nino and La Nina.
What are the trends we see across the North American continent?
Well, the most common trends we see is the development of a split flow pattern. Usually what happens is when we're in an El Nino, the southern jet stream becomes much stronger, and that takes a little bit of the energy away from the northern jet stream. So instead of that northern jet stream diving down into the eastern United States and carving out a big trough, it's subdued, and that trough only comes across the upper Great Lakes in the northeastern United States, and then the southern jet stream becomes your dominant pattern or the focal point for your storms moving across the U.S. So they tend to move across the southern United States. And usually what you see in the Central Plains is that the southern jet stream becomes a dominant player, the storm systems move across, and we remain north of that, but we also remain south of that northern jet. And so we don't have a lot of active weather. That's in a normal El Nino. This year is a little different. We haven't seen that split flow pattern develop, but usually the consequences of that split flow pattern is we see a drier eastern corn belt, a very wet southern one-third of the United States, and a dry Pacific Northwest. And here in Nebraska, the southern half of the state usually has the best chance for above normal moisture, while the northern half tends to see drier conditions, and the northern plains tends to be above normal in terms of temperatures.
What's happened so far across the continental U.S.?
That's the interesting point. When we look at the precipitation regimes that have occurred over the last couple of months as the system has got itself rolling, we've actually seen the precipitation move up in through the central United States and the northern plains. We're still seeing that drier pattern that has temporarily emerged in the eastern corn belt in the northeast, but the Pacific Northwest has been aggressively wet the last 3 weeks, and that pattern looks to continue. So it's kind of a little offshoot of what we normally see, but you know, every one of these events are not the same, and everyone's going to have its own unique features. What we'll be looking for is whether or not that split flow pattern develops as we go into January and February. That might give us a little bit of relief through the winter, but then we would worry about, as the El Nino weakens, a return to the very active storm pattern. If the split flow pattern doesn't develop, boy, it's going to be a long couple months here with the active patterns coming out of the southwest into our region and the copious amounts of moisture with these systems. Most of our precipitation events would either be in the form of rain or very wet, heavy snow events.